Now we're going to bring in someone with an Israeli view. Or Avi-Guy was a military correspondent with the Israeli Defence Force and now policy analyst at Australia-Israeli Jewish Affairs Council, and she joins us from our Melbourne studio. Nice to have you with us as well. Again, let's go back to the Syria question. Was it advisable for Israel to strike inside Syria, and was that sending a message to the likes of Iran and Hezbollah?
I think that it's very easy to understand why Israel would strike any convoy leading to Hezbollah carrying very dangerous advanced weapon systems, because we've seen Hezbollah in 2006 in the Second Lebanon War with their anti-tank missiles, and now with anti-aircraft missiles, which is what, according to reports, the convoy was carrying. I think that there is a consensus, and we haven't seen a lot of furious responses, except for Iran and the likes of Iran condemning the attack on the convoy. And I think that it's important to remember that Hezbollah is a terror organization that is sponsored and funded and armed by Iran. So that brings another international dimension into the question. It's not just Israel and Syria. The civil war in Syria is actually a separate issue to the issue of arming Hezbollah, which has been going on for a very long time.
Now, I want to get to the crux of the question tonight, which is the US and Israeli relationship. Again, it seems to come down to this question of the settlements and the ongoing building and development of those settlements. Ultimately, does that not make a two-state solution possible?
Well, I think that the settlement is definitely an issue within any future negotiations, but it's just one issue out of many, many issues that are just as difficult to resolve and just as important for the end of this conflict, like the question of the right of return, Jerusalem, water. There are many issues that need to be resolved to actually end this conflict. And settlements, if that was the only problem, the only obstacle, it would have been one that's very easy to resolve, because Israel proved in the past that it will give up territory and it will uproot settlements if there is a possibility for real peace. And last time that Israel did so unilaterally in 2005 from the Gaza Strip, the response wasn't great from the Palestinian side. We have now the Gaza Strip is controlled by a terrorist entity, by Hamas, that are dead set on the destruction of Israel. So when Israel pulled out of territory without such assurances as to its security, what we got was constant shelling of towns in Israel proper, not on any side of the border that's not consensus Israeli territory. So the question of settlements...
If I can just come in there, though, we also know that Israel has been accused of exacerbating that situation by the blockade of Gaza, which is increasingly pushing people in Gaza back up against into more and more of a corner. And this is where Israel has been losing international support. With the continuation of the settlements, is this going to continue to isolate Israel?
I think that the whole putting this large emphasis on settlements is part of the problem, because if Obama in the beginning of his first term didn't place that condition on Netanyahu to free settlements, then there would probably be a better chance for resumption of negotiation. What happened is that Netanyahu actually did agree, and all settlement construction was just stopped for 10 months, and Mahmoud Abbas on the other side wouldn't come to negotiation table until the very end of that period, and just to negotiate the extension of the settlement freeze. Israeli settlements have not been increasing in number, not in their size, for many years now. The construction that's been going on is in existing settlements, within the settlements, not increasing its size.
But when we talk about those settlements, you know, I've been there, I've reported from there, and as you know, we're not just talking about outposts, we are talking about satellite cities.
Yeah, but all of the cities, the major settlements are along the Green Line, and a lot of them in any previous negotiations, there were talks of land swaps. All those settlements are supposed to stay within Israeli territory, and with land swaps giving the Palestinians the equivalents in territory in other places. So those settlement blocks are not the main issue. The main issue are the isolated outposts, and those isolated outposts, we all know, according to previous negotiations, what is the stand the Israeli stands on that. And we've seen that in the early 2000s, before the Intifada with Barak, and we've seen that again in 2008 with Olmert, with an even more generous peace initiative that wasn't even replied at all. There was no response from the Palestinian side. So I'm not saying that settlements are not a key issue in future negotiations. What I'm saying is that it's definitely one of the issues, and putting all that emphasis just on that is very counterproductive.
Now, Or Avi-Guy, let me turn to the question then of, if the two-state solution is not viable, are we looking at a one-state solution? And the question I just raised a moment ago, where does that leave Israel? Is there the possibility of apartheid, effectively, and Israel being seen more and more as a pariah state?
Well, not only is the two-state solution viable, I think that for many analysts and for many politicians, and definitely for the majority of both the Israeli and the Palestinian population, it's the preferred solution, and in many cases the only solution. Every poll indicates that both on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, there's strong support for the two-state solution. In Israel, we're talking about the high 60%, and including more than 50%, and when you consider only right-wing voters. So even on the right wing, you have a majority that prefers a two-state solution. The problem is not convincing people to want the two-state solution. The problem is getting over the hopelessness and disillusionment. People are feel quite disillusioned about the possibility of reaching such an agreement in the current conditions. We see that on the Israeli side, you can see that when Abbas prefers to go to the UN instead of to the negotiation table and try to actually circumvent negotiations and achieve statehood elsewhere, breaching previous agreements with Israel in the process.
Let me just ask you this then, a final question. What would you like to see from the United States, with the relationship between Obama and Netanyahu notwithstanding? How can the US move this forward?
Well, I think that international relations and foreign policy are a lot more than just personality clashes or personalities getting along. There are joint interests with the US and Israel on many different levels, including on that question of future negotiations and issues like Iran. And of course, I'm sure that the Americans are just as worried about what's happening in Syria as the Israelis are, and for very good reason. So I think that all in all, in the broader picture, there are very strong relations between the U.S. and Israel, military cooperation, intelligence cooperation. Even before the strike in Syria, sources say that Israel actually notified the American administration in advance that that's what it is planning on doing if weapons are going to be transported to Hezbollah. So I think that first and foremost, it's very important to still remember that regardless of any kind of talk of tensions between Netanyahu and Obama, there are still overarching mutual interests and a great deal of cooperation that's probably, because the volatility of the region, are even stronger now than they used to be ever before. And when it comes to the Palestinian issue, I think that Obama probably learned from his first term, and his insistence on settlement freeze is now we don't hear of it. And I think that what is important now from the American administration is to support the Israeli willingness to negotiate without preconditions, and if anything, working with the Israelis and Palestinians to get to negotiation instead of allowing the Palestinians, like they haven't in the UN before, just not allowing the Palestinians to try and find other ways to deal with that.
We're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much for bringing us your perspective there. Or Avi-Guy, a policy analyst at the Australia-Israeli Jewish Affairs Council, joining us there from our Melbourne studio.